نحن أولياؤكم في الحياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة ولكم فيها ما تشتهي أنفسكم ولكم فيها ما تدعون نزلا من غفور رحيم ومن أحسن قولا ممن دعا إلى الله وعمل صالحا وقال إنني من المسلمين ولا تستوي الحسنة ولا السيئة ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم وما يلقاها إلا الذين صبروا وما يلقاها إلا ذو حظ عظيم صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Shukran to Hafiz Muhammad Lubwama for that beautiful rendition. Very apt verses for the occasion about hikmah and beauty that must accompany the call towards the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and unfortunately is absent sometimes. So next on the program will be the official welcome and introduction of our esteemed guest by none other than Sir Taj Aklekar. So I call upon Sir Taj to do the intros for the morning, and I am but a student in his presence when it comes to being an MC. Taj bhai, podium is yours.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته to each and everyone. When one has to introduce with all the protocol observed, allow me to just record that all protocol is observed, and I speak with permission from our CEO, Dr. Dawah and Honorable Sheikh Fakhruddin Waisi and all the lecturers that are present here today. So it's indeed an honor to stand in front of such luminaries and such activists on this very special topic of today's discourse. Dawah today, challenges and solutions. So within the context of Dawah today and its solutions and challenges, we have in our midst a profound leader who has to a greater extent walked the path of Dawah today. Dr. Yahya Baptiste Brodard, Swiss by demographics, is an assistant professor and research associate at the Maqasid Institute Global. He holds a PhD in religious studies from the University of Freiburg in Switzerland. Interestingly, his doctoral thesis was read in Islamic work in Switzerland, which embraces sociology, religious studies, and theology. Obtained his bachelor's in Paris, master's in social sciences at Freiburg. Dr. Yahya Baptiste Brodard is that he is, and today we share the presence of that vibrant. A prolific writer, ladies and gentlemen, in the specialized fields of his study, and he is I'm almost tempted to say that he is a visiting professor, which perhaps he is. I'm not particularly sure of the academic space, but he is in Cape Town for the next 3 weeks, I think, of his 5-week stay with us here, where he is meeting the master's students on the program, those that wanted to meet with him personally, and then also the module that he is speaking to and reading into within our master's program is contemporary Muslim societies and organizations. The topic of Dawah, its challenges, etc., 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 is not a new discourse within everyone sitting here in the room today. And today I seek your indulgence, seek your presence and interactiveness as we engage with the topic at hand and with the esteemed lecturer who is going to be doing the presentation. Without any further, on behalf of IPSA, we welcome you all, and on behalf of the CEO at the back there, Dr. Dawah De Blanche, it's a pleasure to have you here and to share your presence here this morning. No further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Yahya Baptiste Brodard.
I just want to let everybody know before I hand over to Dr. Baptiste, the first session will be 55 minutes. So we've about 40 minutes of his presentation, and then there will be a 15-minute interactive session of questions and answers, after which will be a tea break, inshallah, for about 20 minutes in the cafeteria with some niceties, and then will be the next session also for another 50 minutes, after which the lunch will be served in the cafeteria as well. So we hope to be done with all of this by 12 o'clock, inshallah. Shukran.
It's on.
Yes, and also want to remind everybody that's following us on Zoom to put their devices on silent, please, on mute, please. Shukran.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to everyone today. Welcome to our brothers and sisters here. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Very academic way, but it's something we try to build together, and we need the input of each of us, because I'm sure that here, everyone, every sister, every brother present here today have experience in Dawah, especially by the fact that we all live, or most of us live, in societies where Islam or where Muslims are a minority. So it is very needed that we don't take this presentation for kind of a course in a passive way, but we should take it to rely to our own personal journey or own experience, and everybody should see how we can contribute to nourish the reflection on Dawah. Not me as a speaker, but all of you, all of people are expected to raise concerns, to ask comments, to ask questions. And that's why also we try to plan the session in order to give enough space for questions, for reaction. So I don't want to speak for the 15 minutes for the first session. The idea is to speak for half of the session and then to open the common discussion, hoping that we have enough questions and comments, or even criticism, because it's a very controversial topic. There is no one single way to tackle it, and everyone has something to bring here. So just a few words to present the outline of the today's talk. First, I would like to start with an introduction to think about Dawah in a critical way, because often we take it for granted. We used to think, oh, Dawah is what Muslim organizations do to try to attract people to Islam. but it involves a lot of dimensions, and I think the introduction aim at showing that diversity in what we understand as Dawah. Later, we want to tackle the issue of Islamophobia, mostly in the Western context, because it mostly started in that specific geographical, political context for geopolitical reasons, for historical reasons, but it spread out to the whole society. So Islamophobia is even manifest in Arab countries, in majority Muslim societies, and we try to discuss how it affects us, and especially why it affects Dawah, and how Dawah has to be adapted to the specific situation we live nowadays. It involves both dimensions here. First, it's very important to be taken at an intellectual, academic level, but also it has a social and political aspect, which is out of the ideological issue to tackle Dawah. So we will see how it declines in various expressions, how it affects us as a Muslim, but also how it goes against the efforts we try to do in the name of Dawah. Later, we want to go to more concrete issues by exploring common mistakes done by organizations active in the world, trying to make some Dawah. So we try to understand how, which will allow us to attain the fourth part on talking about solutions, how we can tackle and address the current challenge, how we can improve the situation and change the status quo in that way. Finally, we want people to debate here. We are here just to, not to give a class, but to try to make an interactive reflection altogether, because that's the way it has to be done in order to bring some barakah and to bring some interest for each of us. So hopefully everyone can go back home with something new, with a new idea or a new way of thinking, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan qawli. We start a normal talk by this dua from the Quran, from our Prophet and Master Musa alayhi salam. We start that normally to speak in front of people, but I put it here on purpose, because this dua has a lot of things with Dawah, has a lot of things with the topic of today. Because what Dawah means first is to share a message, to invite people to the way of Islam. Islam here can be described as a way of life, as a worldview, and the idea of Dawah at first is to spread that around us, not to keep for ourselves. We are blessed enough to get it in our life, but we want to spread it around. But to spread, we need to talk, we need to communicate, and that we will not worship except Allah or God. Because some people translate, they don't want to translate Allah to God when they speak to other people. But actually I think it's important when addressing that topic to non-Muslims in their own language. God means Allah, or the Christian view of God in Arab countries, they call him Allah. So it's not just about concept, it's about language. And I think that for Dawah purpose also here, I will better translate Allah as God when talking about people from other languages, because they don't know what is Allah, they think that's another kind of divinity they have. So the verse say that we agree not to worship nobody except Allah, and not associate anything with him. It's the true monotheism, is Tawheed. This is an invitation for people of other faith, for people of other traditions, and it's assumed to believe in Islam, of course, but also in other theoretical reflection about religions, about spiritual origins of civilization, that the Tawheed is at the heart at the core of every tradition. Even Christianity, even Hinduism, if you go deep inside, you find that it was built on Tawheed. But later it was changed to diverse kind of interpretations, which may look that they are very different, but you still find some kind of belief in all real traditions about the oneness of God, about the concept of Allah, which naturally exists in all civilizations, in all faith. And it's very in line with our understanding of Fitrah as well. So the verse is interesting here because when talking about Dawah, and we will see why, it talks about the main aspect, the most important thing we have to consider. The faith, the belief, the worldview. And the first important thing is Tawheed, is the belief in God, in the oneness of Allah. That's what we wish for people. Now, what is important to remember that verse is sometimes when we look at what happened in the world in the name of Dawah, they express or show Islam and their other aspects, which mean to be related to details. So they may speak about clothes, they may speak about habits, about way of eating, whatever, which is part of the deen of Islam as well, but which is not relevant at that stage. And the Quran speaks, and we refer to other texts, forgetting the most important aspect. This is a start with the Quran, because the Quran should be a start from everything related to Islam, related to our intention. But also, Dawah, we can think about Dawah with another aspect, which is history, and which is very controversial today. So at that age, everybody tries to write back history. And some people may show that Muslims, even some Muslims themselves, they may show the same thing, that Muslims are not tolerant and they are against other faith, other religions. When we look back at history, and the Khalif Umar ibn Khattab, when he went to Quds, to Jerusalem, there was the Fatah, so he got power, and the people are there. He got the authority. He was invited to pray in the church. He didn't pray in the church because he, according to some traditions, if he would have prayed in the church, people would follow him and the church would become a mosque. So today, if you go to that place, you still find that church at the same place. And if you ask the Christians of Quds, of Jerusalem, you will know that in history, they could preserve their faith, they could preserve the Christian practice till Islam came there, from the time Islam came till today. Same in Bethlehem, where the Christian traditions say that Isa alayhi salam was born in there. It's still seen today that there is a mosque. In front of the mosque there is the church, and they built that church where Isa alayhi salam was supposed to be born. So this historical fact that we can still acknowledge today by going to Palestine show that Islam respects the faith of others. Even the great Sahaba, like Umar ibn Khattab, they didn't prevent Christians to practice their faith. So it's important also has historical evidence at that time where people get very confused about our own tradition somehow. Here, going back to the Quran, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawassaw bil haqqi wa tawassaw bis sabr. This basic surah also is very important for the Dawah reflection, as the last time of it show which people are the people saved by God's blessing, by God's grace, although by the time the normal humans normally decline. But except the people And there are four conditions here. Who have faith, amanu, and do righteous deeds, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, and join together in the mutual teaching of truth. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ. So تَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ is very connected to da'wah, because we want to spread da'wah for other people, but also for ourselves. That's why, in my understanding, da'wah is not something we always understand as external. We as the Muslims, we have Islam, and we should spread Islam around us to other people who don't know. But for me, according to my own humble understanding, da'wah is for us first. It's a reminder of what we should do. Because often we don't do what we are supposed to do in our daily life. And this is a reminder of that. And the last part, وَتَوَسَّوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Sabr. Here they say patience, but it's also constancy. It's effort. It's to stay steadfast against the trials, against the difficulty. So this is also very helpful to remember our duty as Muslims for da'wah. So now let's start the introduction. It wasn't an introduction, it was the kind of a basis. We start by quoting the Quran, we start by thinking about some text, but now we can go straight into the topic. And there is a well-known sheikh, imam, well-known in France, well-known in Algeria, Hafid Quran from Algeria. He studied all his life, he's old now. Once, during a khutbah talk, he said in the mosque a sentence that can be translated as such, very harsh, very hard. He said, Islam is the sun, but the clouds which prevent other people to get to the sun, to see the sun, to acknowledge the sun, are the Muslims. So that's a very harsh statement of that sheikh, which is used to speak like that, because they felt, as Muslims, do we do what we are supposed to do in that specific context of France? So we don't speak about other people, we speak about ourselves. And we said, as a community out there, somehow we failed to implement Islamic teachings. We still expect people to join us, to be Muslims, but actually we failed by doing that. When we reflect on that statement, it shows that da'wah is not an easy task. It's a very critical thing, because it involves a high risk and responsibility. It can drive to counterproductive effects. And we'll see how is that later. Counterproductive effects can be very harmful first for ourselves, because if we are some people who prevent others to see Allah's light, I think that's very problematic in terms of our faith. So it involves responsibility which needs a reflection to know if what we do is relevant. But also, after having said that, it can also save people's lives. So it's a duty. It's a risk if it's done bad, but also it's the key to preserve humans' dignity, to preserve humans' justice, and to save other people's life. What we mean in Arabic by da'wah, normally in the modern Arabic at least we say invitation. We mean here invitation to Islam, but it can be outreach to Islam, to make people know, understand about Islam. Even if they don't join, at least they know what it is. Because at that time, most people ignore Islam. They may think they know it, but they know in wrong ways due to kind of media propaganda or just ignorance. And again, we think it's only concerned non-Muslims, but at that time especially it concerns Muslims as well, as many of them, especially in some countries, we don't speak about Cape Town here, where alhamdulillah you have a lot of scholars, imams, shuyukh working here, but in other countries people may be Muslims, so they are Muslim by birth, as we say, they follow their parents' tradition, but they may be very confused about Islam, even in terms of faith. They may have some doubts. They may try to understand what it is. And in that meaning, da'wah is also for them. Sadly, we see over the last years, over the last decades, but especially the last years, I would say, that a lot of Muslims leave Islam now. We always speak about the people converted to Islam, new Muslim reverts, but we forgot that a lot of people leave Islam. So they become atheists most of the time. And it doesn't affect only Western European countries, but also Arab countries. Often this comes from a misunderstanding of what Islam is. Because when we talk to people living Islam, actually we feel that some of them never understood the fundamentals, the deep knowledge of Islam. So they left something, but they didn't taste it before. But even here in Cape Town, just to talk about that week, I was asked by two people I met like that, outside. One person outside and one person in the car, like a taxi. In the taxi, a man from another African country who is not a Muslim, he asked to me, "Oh, you are a Muslim?" I said, "Yes." I say, okay, I know the Quran. I say, yeah, okay. He said, "Yeah, but you're Muslims. So people like you basically you want to kill people like me. Because in your book, in your holy book, it's written that you have to kill the kuffar, and I'm a kafir because I'm not Muslim." So I try to explain as I can, in a very quick taxi drive. But it makes us realize that even here where you have such a dynamic Muslim community, this is not for granted. A lot of people ignore Muslims, or they may be very warm and friendly with you, but they may still think that you are a problem for their safety, and that you read a holy book which asks you to kill them. There are people who really think that way, and sometimes you know some of them, and they don't tell you that because they may be afraid to express that concern. But that's very critical. Another person said, "Oh, you are Muslim, so I won't speak with you anymore because I know that the people of your religion basically they want to force others to follow their way of life. So we don't have nothing to speak." That's just quick examples of that week, last days. Now, we try to, when we face such situations, we try to speak, we try to, help people understand what is Islam, what it means. But beyond that point, it's well known, it's well said that we can only give what we have. So the first need is to develop our faith and to be fully convinced by our faith, to practice what we believe. And I trust that for you people here, I trust you can get that or you get that. I trust that. But for some people, da'wah is not an easy topic because first of all, they have to try to get that certainty, their strong faith in themselves before talking to others. That's also how living Islam is better than spreading Islam by the mouth, by talking. Because when I ask around the world, I ask a lot of people how you came to know Islam. Very few, there are people who are very intellectual, so they like to read books and they came to Islam that way. But most of the converts, as we say, I met, they knew Islam by other people's behavior. So they said, "I have uncle, not his uncle, neighbor close to my home is very warm, he invites me to get tea and he's very friendly and very respectful. I can trust him. If I go to holidays, I know he will protect my home." And later I see he's always going to the mosque, and I felt touched by that. So I got to think, Muslims are straightful people. Islam must be a key, So the good behavior, what we call akhlaq, is often the best da'wah one can do. Finally, to close this introduction, a bit long, sorry about this, but I think it's needed to give some kind of frame. There is a very hard talk again, but I think it's very relevant though. There was another khutbah by another imam in France as well, from Algeria also, but not the same person. It was a few years ago, so he was talking about Muslim activism. So he talked about what Salafism, Jamaat Tabligh, Ikhwan al-Muslimin, Muslim Brotherhood, or other groups, other denominations have made so far in Europe. He said basically they try to make da'wah, to speak a lot, but when you look at the groups, they didn't attract a lot of people, because what have they really made for society and for Muslims? Concretely, not talking, not saying we are the best, we have the truth, but concretely what they did. And he said to the audience, it was a Friday Jummah, it was the khutbah, Friday. He said, you have to ask two questions to you. First question, with Islam, how have you been able to improve your life? Because most people, they didn't grow up with Islam out there in that context. Even if they are Africans, even if they are Arabs by background, the history, the society made the fact that most people out there which go to the mosque pray now, they didn't live all their life with Islam. So they get to practice one time, maybe it was 20, maybe 30, maybe 40. He started practice Islam. So he addressed to that specific kind of Muslims in the mosque. He said, since you practice Islam, what have changed in your life? How you could improve your own condition, your own behavior, your own happiness, your own health, whatever. First question. Second question. Because of Islam, because of your faith and Islamic practice, what have you done for others people well-being? How have you contributed to society? How have you improved people's life around you? He said that's the two major questions we have to ask myself first and all people. And sadly, often we can say no to the first one and no to the second one. Or if we say yes, it's so-so. We try to do our best, but we are not sure about that. And I have other examples later. That's a very strong statement. Then he said, if you don't reply yes to the two questions, you cannot speak about da'wah. Because how come you can share something you don't have in your life? You want to say other people, Islam is the solution, Islam is the way you can get your life better, but actually they see you are very sad, very depressed, very angry, very miserable. That's very sad, very important. Myself, to speak honestly, I struggle with the same problem. My father was in a sheltery home, like a kind of hospital, because he was paralyzed for years. And when I went to visit him, I saw my ex-chemie professors. You know, in high school I get this chemie physics course. I wasn't good at that. And I saw him there. And then he recognized me, he said, hi. We haven't met like for 15 years, 10 years. I said, okay, hi. He was just 40 years old. I said, what happened to you? It was very strange, physically. He said, oh, I got a sickness, so I will die in a few months. But actually the sickness is that the muscle disappear and he become very like a child again, you know. And he say, I just have a newborn baby, but I'm very happy. And every time I saw that guy, who I don't even know if he was Christian, he's not Muslim, maybe atheist, I don't know. Every time I saw him, he's so happy. He's so happy, never complain. But you look at his life, it's very good, very big, very difficult ibtila. How to say ibtila in English? Tribulation. It's a very big tribulation, but he's always happy. And myself, I go, I pray, whatever, Muslim, and I'm sad, I go there, I'm upset, he see me angry. Then subhanAllah, I said I cannot speak to him about Islam, astaghfirullah. I can't. Because if I do, I say to him, Islam is the solution, he will look at me and say, you're such a liar. Because you complain, you know, he's a nice guy, he wouldn't say that maybe, but it's very hard for me. You know, it means that's why I gave that introduction to see that da'wah is not an easy task. We can share when people come, but it's difficult to go to someone to propose the solution when we haven't applied the solution for ourselves. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to say here. But for the, I can speak 5 minutes more, I think, before the discussion. So maybe we can address other problems, more concrete issues, more social and political ones now. Basically, we can find two problems, two issues, which abstract the rise of Islam in the world at that age. First of all, there is a main anti-Islam propaganda in the media, in the political talks. There are some think tanks working about that, writing reports, designing strategy. And it's real, it's not conspiracy things. You can check in official reports. They try to see Islamic practice is a problem for the integration in our society. Let's see how we can deal with that and assimilate the Muslim minds somehow. You have that problem from non-Muslim, non-believers. The second issue we have is Muslim practicing something else in the name of Islam, what we call cultural Islam as well. I took that from the Sheikh Abdul Hakim Quick, who came here, and I think 10-15 years ago he was giving a talk about Dawah, about a lot of things. So I just repeat what he said, because I think I have nothing to add here. But also it shows us the Quranic base, again, the ayat in the Quran. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. That Allah won't change the people condition or what in the qawm, in the tribe, in the people place, if they don't change what it is in themselves, basically. So now we talk just about the first problem, from outside. Islamophobia, what we call like that, or anti-Islam propaganda. Islamophobia is not a very proper name, because it means, phobia means fear of Islam. So some people are afraid of Islam, that's true, but also others, and mostly the activists, the thinkers behind those work, are not afraid of Islam. They just don't like Islam. It's against their agenda. It's against their own program and their own way of living and their own projects for society. So they oppose to Islam for that. It's not a phobia. It's more anti-Islam tactics, anti-Islam propaganda, anti-Islam struggle. First of all, at that time, Islam is challenged at the intellectual level. It can involve academics, but not only. And you will see at that time that a lot of people study Islam in depth, but with the intention not to understand it, but with the intention to deconstruct it. So there are people studying 20, 30 years, they know more in terms of data, in terms of content, they can know more than a sheikh, but they get a totally wrong approach. So they just try to get some tricky points in the fiqh tradition, in the hadith, or even in the Quran, and to raise some so-called contradiction and doubts. And often, especially in Europe now, you will see that these people are very Muslim friendly. They say we love Muslims, but we don't like Islam. I mean, they don't say that because often they are not sincere. They make a kind of undercover job, because it's not easy to say, I studied Islam 20 years with the aim of deconstruction. So they say we like Muslims, but we think that Muslims somehow are victim of their tradition, and that they are like that just because they are brainwashed, so we try to deconstruct Islam for that. That's what they say, a lot of them. It has a very high influence now, especially because of the rise of internet, where any content you can find on YouTube. For instance, you have video, they can be entitled Truth About Islam. Let's talk the truth about Islam. And in the video they will put some Quranic verses, ayat Quran, a hadith, whatever, they mix all and they say that's the evidence that Islam is wrong. And people are lazy now, so they check like 20 minutes video and then it has a big doubt. And you think, oh yes, the video gave evidence on that. Actually, it's not. There are a lot of mistakes in the argumentation, a lot of things, but the problem, this video, even if they are wrong, they have an effect. Another example here, very interesting for me because it's in the country where I was raised. It's like just 2 years ago, a Christian pastor, which was involved in interfaith dialogue before, which it is very strange, but he was involved in the dialogue with Muslims, so he got a lot of Muslim friends in the past. Then he began to join a kind of evangelical movement, and he began to have kind of animosity against Islam. He wrote a book entitled Comparing Islam in the West, and that is supposed to give evidence that Islam is a political construction which only aim at power, at empire building, and so on. So the problem of this book, I got the book, I didn't want to buy the book not to help, but I found the book in a library, so a library, public library, so I could get through it. It's full of mistakes, of course, but the problem, it was highlighted by the media and by some politicians, and they read it and they say, oh, yes, now we have the evidence. Now this book is a serious contribution that shows how Islam is dangerous in a country. So I was expected Muslims, thinkers, Muslim leaders in the country, Muslim organizations to respond to that, to respond in a formal way, because you cannot just say, oh, it's not relevant, it's fake. You have to respond to the so-called argumentation. And nobody did that till now. Nobody did that till now. So myself, I had the intention to do with a group of people. But I went to the big umbrella Muslim organizations we have. I say, why you don't do that? They say, no, we don't have time, it's not relevant. But actually it's really relevant. Because imagine you have these politicians. Let's speak about a honest person. It doesn't know Islam. It doesn't care, it's not interesting. But he gets to read that book. When you read that book, for him it's evidence. He say, okay, Islam is like that. Then you think, oh, the Muslims here, they are well organized, but nobody replied to that. If nobody replied, it means that actually they don't have any response. It means that what is in the book is the truth. And that's very problematic. The lack of reaction make Dawah also very difficult in that specific context. Now, you will find also online mostly, you will find that the extremist, literalist narrative about Islam, like for instance, Daesh groups kind of production, they write articles, they do videos, whatever. Other groups like that. What the way they portray Islam is exactly somehow the way that Islamophobists or people against Islam understand it. So when you have a right-wing group writing about Islam, you have Daesh writing about Islam, you compare, it's very in line, it's totally in line. They have the same kind of argumentation. And for them, they will say, yes, we have that understanding of Islam, we want to oppress people. They don't use that word, but somehow the result is the same here. And it's full of mistakes. In terms of methods, it's not consistent at all. But here it doesn't matter because people take it as granted and they take it as evidence for their own agenda. In internet, it's a crazy other story. Sorry to say this, but in France, like a few years ago till today, there is a guy who writes about Islam. So basically, you know, he prepared some videos, he put the videos on YouTube, and his point is always the same. His point is to show that what the Sheikh said, he take for instance a Sheikh who has a nice understanding of Islam, a Sheikh who expressed the depth, the deep understanding of what Islam is, he tackled them. He say, no, they are not proper shuyukh, they made mistake, he's not a real imam. So basically, he is not even a Muslim. He attacked all Muslims who have different versions of Islam. He said that the true Islam is Al-Qaeda, Daesh, and that the other one are fake Muslims. But this guy is not even Muslim. For me, he looks like right-wing activism. Nobody knows who he is. He's a fake identity. What's interesting here, you see a lot of Salafist groups out there, they take these videos and they say, oh, this man is good. He showed that the Imam Fulan is a liar. You know, because everything against their own interpretation of Islam is to be rejected for them. So it's very problematic again. And all this movement online, all these activities online, it leads young people to doubt about the faith. They say, as I think it was Yasser Qadi once say, we used to talk about fiqh details. How you think that according to the real practice of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you think you have to pray like this or like that, or turn your finger when you recite Shahada. He said, well, while we are talking about that, our souls are wondering. They are talking together. They say, you think that Allah really exists? You think there is a God? You think that the Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a prophet? And it's true. It's true. It happens now. Sometimes we don't realize because the young people will be afraid to tell that to Muslims. But when you spend time with them, you can listen to such statements or questions. Then here, you have also the construction of Islam in universities, mostly in the West. It's based on the secularist agenda. It promotes a postmodernist ideology where everything is supposed to be relative. There is no truth, there is no God, we don't know the truth, so everything is based on your own subjectivity. This epistemological paradigm somehow is very widespread now in the academics, especially in the Islamic studies. It's kind of a transformation of what we call Orientalism, which now they don't use that word, but they still continue the same kind of ideas. And often they promote progressive Islam, but without method, without boundaries. So it changes some minor questions first, but you don't know to what extent it can lead at the end. And we can ask here, it's important to ask the question, can everything be explained by rational thinking? Because actually it's not. Actually, there are some points you cannot respond just by the reasoning. Some points you can, but not everything. So just these few examples to say that an intellectual jihad effort is really needed here. When we think about Dawah, this is totally to do with Dawah. Dawah is not just to go out, khuruj 3 days or 40 days. I see people, so I don't want to criticize that. I will speak about this later. It's not wrong, but it's deeper than that, and we have other problems, especially over the last decade, I think. Last thing, and then we'll open the discussion. Islamophobia also manifests in the West, but not only, in other countries at the political level. So here we're not in the ideological frame. We are not at the level. We are at the level of politics, of a country wanting to implement its rules. The problem, since there have been quite a lot of terrorist attacks in various countries, the 9/11, but after the 9/11 in a lot of other countries, but especially in the Muslim world, but also in Europe, you have had this narrative that the priority is to fight terrorism. But somehow when you see what they do, you don't understand to what extent it will be. Because fighting terrorism can become fighting Islam. We see that in France now, that they try to differentiate between the good and the bad Muslims, the good and the bad Islam. Basically, the good Islam is the Islam who supports the government's authority. So if you have a mosque and you always agree with the government and you surrender to everything they say, you are considered as good Muslim. And these people, in many countries in the West, they will tell you that you shouldn't talk about politics, about economy, about social issues, about environmental issue, ecological, nothing. You should just speak about your Ramadan fasting and prayers. And they don't care about that. They want Islam to be in the private sphere. So, in that extent, there is a confusion because you have new policies of investigation of police arrest, which are supposed to tackle terrorist issues. But you see that in a lot of cases, normal Muslims who have nothing to do with extremist tendency, they have nothing to do with whatever terrorist or violent actions, are still targeted and they got problems. And sometimes it's very weird, and I speak with evidence. It's very weird because in some countries you have people nothing to do with the terrorism, propaganda, whatever. They are not extremists, they are normal people, very peaceful. They got targeted, they got problem with the government, whereas real extremist, violent people in the name of Islam, sectarian people trying to make violent action, they are still free and they do a lot of things. So it's very surprising what happens somehow, and I speak about that with evidence. I can develop this point, but we don't have time to speak about every aspect. Last point, is the situation better in the Arab world? Very interesting. Myself, I was arrested in Lebanon. I was imprisoned in Lebanon, so I visited their prison as a detainee. Because actually, basically I went to a Shia neighborhood and I wanted to buy some books to understand their thinking, their thought about Islam, because I don't really know about Shias. I'm not very interesting, but I feel I still have to understand. Then I went to a mosque and I prayed alone, and after praying I went out and people came to me, civilians, like normal people. They came and say, "What are you doing here?" I said, in Arabic, I said, "I just prayed in the mosque and I'm outside now, just to go back home." They say, "You are not from Lebanon. You are not Lebanese." I say, "No, I'm not." Say, "How come you speak Arabic?" And they get upset while he asked this question. "How come you speak Arabic?" Then I explained to him, I learned. I'm interested in languages. And they said, "Give me your passport." I knew it was Hezbollah people, so okay, I give my passport on my phone. I opened my passport. They said, "You've been to Algeria?" I said, "Yes, I lived there." "You've been to Mauritania?" Very strange. "So now you come with us." I started like that. And when I was put in prison, it's a long story, but I went to four locations to be interviewed, so they insulted me, they treated me badly, and they make fun of me because I spoke Fusha, I couldn't speak Amiya, for instance. It was a kind of interesting story when it's finished, but very difficult at that time. And basically they spoke badly against me because they say I'm weird, that I studied Islam in Algeria and that I speak Arabic, and basically for them I was suspected to be a terrorist. And after when they decide something without any evidence, they sent me to jail. So when you're in jail, you're supposed to be guilty. It's very difficult to say I did nothing because they insult you when you say that. In the jail out there, you cannot pray. Nobody prays. Everybody is Muslim, but nobody prays because everybody is afraid. And even to find a clean space and to find water to perform the wudu is difficult. So it's kind of history. When you get out, you feel, subhanAllah, what happened to me here? Just for being, basically, you speak Arabic, Muslim, you travel. Nothing else. And they treat you like that. And I think also in Algeria, I lived in Algeria, I have a lot of respect for Algeria. In Algeria, the grassroots people are very, because of the history, they fought against the colonizer. So they are very proud to be Muslim. They defend Islam. And the grassroots people, they really respect you and love you if they see you are Muslim. But when you work with high people I worked in the United Nations there, UNDP, with Algerians, but from a very high background in society. And they made a lot of bad jokes against Islam, and they criticized because you pray, because it's kind of bourgeoisie of the country. So most of them rejected Islam, and they speak it in a very bad way. And I said to them, it's amazing. I never heard so bad comments about Islam in Europe. And know that I'm in Algeria, outside everybody is a believer. Mosques are full, but in your office, because it's high in society, you feel free to talk such a bad way about the deen of your own country. So it was amazing. I think these problems are very difficult to tackle at the political level, but we need to raise awareness to discuss this, because they don't like that point to be discussed, and maybe an advocacy work is needed here. Inshallah, I hope you have comments or questions or something to say. تفضلوا. شكرا. السلام عليكم. Bismillah. Sorry, I don't. Yes, I think you need to speak with the mic in order that the people online can hear you.
Yeah, shukran for the opportunity. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. One of the greatest challenges we have currently is a bill that's about to go to court is tackling people who to believe in what they might say or cannot say. We are addressing Muslims in particular. As I'm speaking right now, our religious organizations has been asked to respond to this bill that is going to court, and if it gets passed in South African courts, this bill has a right to instruct a human, and I'm speaking here about Muslims in particular, who to believe in and what they can or cannot say. Your response to this, please?
Shukran for the question. I think it's an important concern. I hope somebody hears a response, that he knows better the local context that I do, because I cannot speak about what I don't do, but about what I don't know. At this point, however, I hope somebody respond. No, I think behind you there is somebody. Just before, I can say that it's a major concern of other countries as well. But let the sister respond, inshallah.
Shukran. Assalamu alaikum. Just with regard to the question, I don't know whether or not I'll be able to answer it, but the Muslim Marriages Bill does not, it is no longer before us. We have the Single Marriages Bill, and then we have a green paper, which is currently before the court. And on the 26th of August, we will be going to court in terms of the Muslim marriages. So I think that the question in itself, we need to be able to know what is happening within the legal sector, because the Muslim Marriages Bill it's no longer there. It is the secular, it's the current Singular Marriages Bill, and there is a current green paper that is speaking to marriages. So I think it's very important that we speak to our local context before we make broader assumptions on the content of those particular bills that is currently before the court, before the Parliament as well as Cabinet. I don't know if I'm answering you, but I think it's exceptionally contentious, but it's contentious to the point where we don't understand the content of the two processes. And I think it's very important, because otherwise we will have people speaking to it in a very populist way and not actually understanding why we need the regulation of Muslim marriages within South Africa, because at the end of the day, it is women that are disproportionately impacted by the non-regulation of Muslim marriages. So I hope I explained, because my context is I'm the attorney for the women's legal sector, and so I am doing the case of the Muslim marriages. Thank you, and I think it's very important that we place this in context.
Shukran. Bismillah. There is a sister here wanting to.
alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would firstly like to say shukran. Your knowledge is wonderful. And I'd like to firstly add to what you have just said, or to highlight to the House that I feel like we as Muslims are forgetting something when it comes to Dawah. Firstly, here in South Africa, there's this notion that often people go and give Dawah to rich people. They forget that there's poor people who actually do not have this knowledge and they yearn for it. They crave for it, but we don't go there and give them. Further to that, when we do go there, we come once, make this big event, come with food, and then leave them. And then expect the people to continue being Muslims while they do not have knowledge. Then after that, we come outside and say, you know what, people are no longer Muslims, people are coming in and going, and the rate of Islam in South Africa continues to be stagnant. Yet we do not go back, yet we do not go and nurture. You know, yes, it is incumbent upon each and every person who gets knowledge to further get more knowledge, but what about the aspect of nurturing? What about the aspect of us going back and say, I will hold your hand, we'll crawl together until you can walk for yourself? In addition to that, I would also like to ask, we live in a modern world where we now have social media, and social media, alhamdulillah, has given us a platform where we can actually do dawah from our homes or wherever we are. But now again, as you stated that Islam is receiving attacks. There are people who have dedicated their time just to attack Islam. Now, social media is an open hub. Everybody comes and says whatever. Now, my question to you is, us going and doing dawah in social media, is it us not working backwards? Because again, the more harder we try, the more the Islamophobes or all those people who are attacking Islam are taking it more. Shukran.
Shukran, sister. I think you raise very important, interesting points, and many thanks for that, because these questions, basically there are 3 points. The 3 points are very important. I think the next part of the talk will try to address those points, but before we start, it's very important to remind one thing. 3 points you said. The first point is about giving dawah to specific people, like the richest people or people who are supposed to be more interesting. According to me, it's totally wrong in terms of Islam. We want for other people what we want for ourselves. We respect everyone, regardless of wealth, color, social class, gender, whatever. Like Allah said in the Quran, قَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي Adam. But we are all from Adam, we are all connected. Humans are humans. From a rich, poor, there is no preference to give to a rich to a poor in terms of dawah. That's purely strategic. And people think too much about strategies, they forgot the message of Islam. They do dawah to the rich because they think, oh yes, it's better for us because they are wealthy, we get a good zakat, we get good support. But for me it's wrong. I mean, we understand the idea, but I think strategy cannot replace the message of Allah and cannot change what is Islam. I got the same issue. I witnessed that when I lived in France. I lived in housing projects, so there were very few whites like me. And when I converted to Islam, people said, "Wow, mashallah, it's very good. He's a convert. He's a convert." And everybody wanted to show me as an example. But I got a lot of friends from sub-Saharan African background, growing up in France, just like European like me, but their skin is black. And I said, yes, this one, Ibrahim, is from Congo, his parents come from Congo, he converted to Islam too. They said, okay. They don't care at all. And for me it was very problematic, because they treat people, Muslims, according to the background, can be the color of the skin, can be the family background, whatever.
I think it's totally problematic and against Islamic teaching, and you raised that. It's a very important question. The second one, no, I'm. SubhanAllah. The second one was about. Huh? No, the third is social media.
Nurturing them, keeping contact.
Oh, yes. The second thing is also very important, because often we want to give da'wah to people, and when they said shahadatain, you are Muslim now, mashallah, we make a nice video. As Muslim, we convert. It's like a trophy. It's like, okay, we got one. And then the next day, the person is totally left alone, and he doesn't even know how to pray. He doesn't have friends. Some people have to leave the family. They have to leave the friends. They are totally alone, and they fail so often to be included, to be integrated in the community, and it's very problematic. And that's why, as you said, a lot of these people, they get tired and they leave Islam, not because they reject the faith, but just because they don't find any entry and any integration in their new community. Now later we'll speak about Colombia and Mexico, and it's a very widespread problem out there. I think one of the worst cases I'm seeing is that there is a new tendency in NGOs doing da'wah. Somehow they want to make video about everything, so they like to make video of new people saying shahada, and then they don't even talk to them. And then these people complain, they say, I don't know if I should pray, what is Surah Al-Fatiha, how I pray. Oh yeah, we are not, I'm busy. But for making the video, they do, because then they can send the video as an evidence that they do work and they apply for funding, and that's very, very problematic. And often we feel shy and we feel afraid to criticize this, but I think it's a real problem. Third point you said about social media. Social media, it's also a main problem we have, and we talked with the students from that institution a few days ago about that. And my opinion, may be wrong here, I would say that, you have endless debates about Islam, whatever. I think the debates are not good, but I think that it's needed to reply to some people's arguments. So basically they say Islam is bad because they have to cut the rabbi's head, whatever. Somebody say like this, and then he developed his talk and so on. Normally, often the intention is not good. So if the intention is not good, you will lose the debates because it never ends. So for me, it's a waste of time. But what is good to do is to take the narrative, to take the idea, and we reply with a nice paper, with argumentation, with, we reply to the attacks, and everybody can check. So the people who really want to know, they know where to look at to get the response to their questions. But that's very good points, and thank you. Shukran. Yes, Bismillah.
I just want to find out, there's a lot of negativity around Islam in this world. I just want to find out what attracted you to Islam. I mean, why did you become a Muslim when you were in a state or in a country like France?
Shukran.
Switzerland or whatever. Apologies for that.
Shukran, that's a good question for me to include in my presentation, because I don't think it's first of all, alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, sorry. Shukran for the question. I tried to include that in the presentation, not to talk about me, but to try to relate on some aspects I would like to develop, but maybe in the second part, if you let me answer a bit later, inshallah, because it's quite a long question.
Sorry, the follow-on question on that is that there's a lot of debate around how we actually approach Islam and how we actually relay this particular content to somebody that's not Muslim, Christians or Jewish or whatever as well. Do you just portray them in terms of stating what Islam is, or do you give them a comparative text in terms of, how Christianity, Islam, and Judaism actually relate to one another, so that you can actually convince them in terms of not which one is the better, but which one will actually change your life in a much more positive way, as well as how you can actually contribute to society as well. I mean, all three of those three religions actually does that as well. I mean, how do you actually come out on top? You know, it's a very difficult thing. I'm talking here in terms of like some of the videos that I've actually looked in terms of what Ahmadiyya actually did as well.
Yeah.
So how do we go back to that particular state to actually try and convince people that Islam is probably much better or not? It's not the right way to say it, but that's the way.
Yes, shukran. For that question, actually, it's a very pragmatic question. I think, first of all, da'wah has to be adapted, it has to be tailored according to the people you talk to, because people have different backgrounds, sensibilities, and also they are attracted to Islam for diverse reasons. Often, I mean, at least for me, I used to think that people get to Islam because of the dogma. I think, they convert to Islam because they understand that Islam is the proper way that gives the Tawheed clearly and that gives the truth about God. So it's kind of a rational thinking about God, kind of rational motivation to find the proper dogma, what's the truth. But when talking about many people converted to Islam, I found out that other people have totally other motivations. So for some people it's experience. It's like, you know, they suffered from a lot of problems, issues, alcoholism, whatever, and when they get to know Islam, they think, with that, I will change my life. So the first intention may seem a bit strange, may seem a bit, you know, using Islam as a tool, but when they get into the process, they feel that Islam responds to their needs and they begin to be real believers. So with these people, we won't talk the same thing. But as you said, I think here I just wanted to draft, it's not mine, I wanted to draft different ways of doing da'wah, approaches to da'wah. The first one, as you said, it's based on debates, arguments, refutation of others' people belief. So Ahmad Didat, rahimahullah, was very well known for that in South Africa. So he is a big example of this approach, to talk to Christians and to show what you believe in is not current. Even in your Bible, if you get to read your Bible, we will go to the Quran, and Quran is more in line with your own tradition. But it doesn't work for all people. You know, there are like people that get very offended by that. They feel, you don't respect my faith. And maybe 10 years later, you see these people become Muslim, but by another way. Not intellectual way, but mostly by akhlaq, by the way you live, by what you give to them, but the love you send to them, you know. Also, there are a lot of da'wah organizations now, so they have their they have their own programs and projects. So they go to non-Muslim majority societies in order to spread Islam. So for instance, they can gather Quran, Mus'haf, and give that to everyone for free. And some people, they even give a flower in the street. We are Muslim, we'll give you a booklet about Islam, a flower. Or different kind of activities to try to show the message by booklets, by books, by Quran, or whatever. It's another way. So for me, there is not just one way to do it. I think there are mistakes, but these ones are totally correct way to do it when it's done properly. Also, you find local mosques trying to spread Islam around in their neighborhoods, in the town. So they have open house days. I think this is very important. Now in a lot of countries they do that. They offer a meal, they just open the door of the mosque and say everybody's welcome to come and to ask questions. And people are curious, they go, they ask questions, they get a nice welcome, and it may be very efficient. Not just to attract people to Islam, but to build kind of peace, to build kind of common respect and understanding. And that's very efficient in terms of da'wah. In the same mindset, you have presentation in the schools, so an imam or whoever goes to schools to speak about Islam to the kids. And it's very efficient at that age because the children don't have so many prejudices like some of the adults. They are more open to know what it is, you know. So all these ways are different ways to try to make da'wah. I wouldn't say there is one correct. It depends of the context, it depends of the tone and the people you talk to. Yes.
We have a last question now. The time is over. Yes.
Later.
Let the guest speak.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Dr. Brodard, I think your talk was very inspiring, particularly with respect to some of the personal experience that you shared with us. The question I have is, I think a perception of da'wah as something that has remained kind of static. It's not a dynamic aspect of deen that has manifested a great deal of change or evolution over time. And it's the model of da'wah I'm particularly referring to. And perhaps if I can explain by way of analogy, in academic discourse we have this thing called intersectionality. So if one happens to be an activist that fights for, let's say, the rights of the Palestinians, you are not necessarily concerned about human rights in that particular fashion. If it refers to also matters of sexual misconduct, then that relates to a sense of social justice in a very broad sense. So the question I have when it comes to da'wah, is there any kind of thinking about da'wah in a broader way, outside of a narrow or a one-dimensional approach to da'wah that speaks only to the method of teaching and preaching and inviting and asking others to embrace a value system that we would like to convey to them as ideal? And perhaps if I can use a very specific example, has there been any thought given to, let's say, da'wah to people who have inclinations for faith, have inclinations for a higher power and appreciation of a greater being, who happen to be part of, let's say, the LGBT community? They feel themselves isolated because of sexual orientation, but they want to be drawn to a faith-based life that might help them to better understand their own condition and at the same time be better human beings and relate to people in society. Has approaches to da'wah given some kind of thought to that kind of intersectionality that to my mind seems to be absent?
Thank you for the question. For me, I got also two points in what you said. The first point is very important, and for me it relates to my main argument while talking about da'wah, which I tried to explain in the introduction. This means that da'wah is not the first thing to do. It's not the main purpose of Islam. The main purpose of Islam is to live Islam. To live Islam means to fight for social justice too. So this is not da'wah in itself. Da'wah here is a side effect of living Islam, implementing Islamic principles. Because the fact to practice Islam, to live Islam, to respond to the message of the revelation for a believer implies to take position and to fight against injustice in society, to help people, to give people, regardless of whatever they belong to. So for instance, I have an example in terms of humanitarian aid, social work. Islam teaches to do that, not for da'wah, not for whatever. The Quran teaches us to do that unconditionally, without any expectation. We do because two things. We believe in revelation, so we believe that Allah asked us to do that, so we do it. Then we believe in the tradition, teaching of the Prophet ﷺ, of the Quran too, that we have to love people and that we have to show rahmah for people, for the universe, for whoever. So when we implement that, it's not what we call da'wah, it's what we call acting Islam. It shows it has an effect in social justice. But people, of course, it has also an effect in terms of da'wah, but for me it's a side effect. It's a side effect, we shouldn't think too much on it. That's my main point. Then when you talk about the LGBT groups or whatever category, subcategory or people may identify, here again, in Islam there are some different streams, different priorities, different things. The main message of Islam is about the faith, so the faith is for everybody regardless of the belongings. So when talking about Tawheed, we don't speak about sexual orientations or whatever at that stage. Then it depends to the level we want to apply Islam, but the message of Tawheed can be expressed to anyone regarding whatever. And I think, as you said, in a lot of expressions there have some discriminations or whatever. For me also it comes from the fact that details and fundamentals are mixed up, and fundamental questions remain like neglected somehow, and we start to speak about concrete human behavior, which of course Islam teaches things. Islam has a way to follow, but it doesn't mean that you cannot say the Shahadatain if you don't follow whatever practice. You can be alcoholic, you can become Muslim, for instance. So I don't know if I respond to your points. My main point is that before Dawah, beyond Dawah, there is a fact to implement Islamic teachings, which is a Dawah in itself. But we don't do that for the purpose of attracting people for Islam. We do that because of belief and because we have to show rahmah for people.
Shukran, thank you very much to the presenter, Dr. Yahya Baptiste Brodard, and all the listeners as well, those who are present here and online. So this will be the conclusion of the first session of our program, and you're going to get a well-deserved break. So if we proceed now to the cafeteria, where we'll have some refreshments and some tea and coffee, and then we'll return in about 15 to 20 minutes, inshallah, for the second session, and after which will be the lunch, inshallah. Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu. Welcome back to our second session for this morning with Dr. Yahya Baptiste Brodard, all the way from the heart of Europe, from Switzerland, French speaking, and he comes with a wealth of experience about Dawah and particularly Islamophobia in that part of the world. It's a very exciting part of the world. It's a part of the world that kind of has an influence on the rest of the world. So inshallah, in this next session, we'll be talking more about those elements, and particularly from his point of view. We seldom get the opportunity to hear somebody from that part of the world directly. So inshallah, even in our questions and answers, I would love to see us probing into the Islamic and Muslim situation in Europe. From a European, from somebody who lives it, he can give us some better, throw some better light on that, inshallah. So without any further ado, I'm going to call upon Dr. Yahya to start his presentation. فليتفضل مشكورا. شكرا.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم والسلام على المرسلين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome back. Please note that some of you got some questions we couldn't reply just before because of lacking time. So I invite you to give your questions in a short time. We will have time to address all the questions, inshallah. For that reason, I hope not to be too long, just to keep enough space for everybody's very interesting comment. Even at the break time, there were some concerns about a few points. So, just to continue what we were saying before, there was an interesting question here about the approach to Dawah. And I tried to explain, to give just a few notes of what's doing in the level Dawah today. But we cannot speak about Dawah, at least in the European context, without speaking about Tabligh Jamaat. And Jamaat Tabligh is supposed, actually you all know the history of the movement, so it's been here for about 100 years now, from India, and it's spread in a lot of parts of the world, with a common methodology, with common guidelines, with common understanding of Islam, as it's supposed to be. But actually, according to the context, according to the country, you will see that the movement evolved in very different ways. So when talking about Dawah, of course, we talk about this work, important work that Jamaat Tabligh had done in many countries of the world, and they were considered as the main Dawah movement because they focused on that, even if their main focus is to try to bring Muslims back to Islam. So they mainly focus on Muslims or people supposed to be Muslims and to try to take back to their religious practice. But according to the country, you'll see that it evolved in a very different way. In France, Tabligh Jamaat started in the late 60s, 70s, and it started with the migrants coming from North Africa, West Africa, trying to help them to accommodate spaces to pray, to be able to follow the Islamic rules in terms of religious practice, basically. But then, as a new generation of Muslims were born from these migrants, but born in France, raised in France without any link with their country except by the family, the aim of the Tabligh in that country was to talk to the youth, mostly in housing projects in deprived neighborhoods, and to make them coming back to Islam. I don't know if we can say coming back to Islam because most of them didn't have any initiation to Islam, although their parents were Muslims. In that country, they got very important results. So they could be very successful in taking people back to religious practice, helping getting to the mosque, helping getting away from drugs, from crime. And even the police in some suburban deprived neighborhoods, they just expressed some thanks towards Tabligh because they acknowledge the fact that only them could make kind of a pacification of difficult neighborhoods. So for instance, there were some shootings, a lot of drug dealings, a lot of fights, and the police couldn't solve the situation. And the Tabligh was the only external group going to those deprived houses and trying to speak with the youth, and finally they got a very important result. But if you look at the American context, or at least USA, at least the city of New York, if you look at that, you'll see that it's totally different. I've been there too for between 2007 2011. I went there 4 or 5 times, and I visited the Tabligh Markez also. But there were people complaining that the Tabligh Jamaat out there, in that specific context, they didn't go in deprived and dangerous neighborhoods, and they were criticized just to stay among themselves and to not to do dawah, just to do khuruj and activities among people coming from Indian, Pakistani backgrounds, and not addressing the needs of Muslims from other country, other backgrounds or other neighborhoods. So now in Colombia this year, I spent a few months in Colombia since last year, and I've heard that before the crisis, the coronavirus crisis, there were also Tabligh Jamaat going there. And the Tabligh Jamaat are very appreciated in Colombia. So my point here is, has never been to criticize Jamaat Tabligh, because I think they have played a major role, like we can see in France in the past, not anymore. But today, in Colombia, in Mexico, in those kind of countries, Muslims really enjoy to have the visit of Jamaat Tabligh because they lack everything. They lack religious teaching, they lack people just explain them how to pray, how to perform the ablution, and basic things. The main problem is that mostly Jamaat came from Pakistan, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, even from here, even from South Africa. They went to Colombia a few times, and in many groups, none of them could speak Spanish. And out there, it's very difficult to find a person speaking English in Colombia or Mexico. So basically, there was a lack of understanding. Communication was not possible, and they needed to find kind of intermediate between both. So I think that Tabligh Jama is the more traditional way we think when thinking of this Dawah project, but somehow based on the fact to repeat what they have been doing for so long, sometimes it may appear a bit backward, according to some. So in France, they lost a lot of their influence. When Salafism raised in France, they took back a lot of people following Tabligh before, and they learned that Tabligh is bid'ah, whatever. So they were cut away from that group, historically. But Dawah in non-Muslim societies goes far beyond the role of Tabligh Jamaat. It's just one of the stakeholders among others. One very interesting example now is the region of Chiapas in south part of Mexico. It's close to Guatemala. It's a very poor area of the country, far away from the capital, and it's well known for its native population. So out there, most people are native. It means they still have their tradition, they still have their language, Tzotzil. Some of them don't speak Spanish and still follow the same tradition of their ancestors. What's very interesting out there, in a small town named San Cristobal De Las Casas, it's very small, so you can walk from one extreme to the other extreme of the town within an hour. So it gives you the idea of how small it is. Muslim prisons started 25 years ago out there with the Morabitun movement. They sent them, Morabitun is also represented in Cape Town, it's well known here. So a group from Spain went there with the intention of doing Dawah, and they tried to talk with the Zapatist movement, which was an armed force against the government, but the Zapatists didn't accept to follow Islam, so they weren't interesting. Yet, Morabitun stayed and tried to talk with the tribe leaders, Tzotzil, and some of them accepted Islam. After a few years, you can find out there up to 800 local people, so native Tzotzil from that town, who converted to Islam. What happened is that they believed that the only Muslim presence in the country was in that group. And that group at that specific time, we don't want to criticize the group here, this is not the point, but the point is that some leaders at that time made important mistakes in terms of Dawah. Basically, they made Islam very difficult for local people. They said that tortilla, which is a cornbread without any meat, without anything but, is haram. So they believe the people that. And I thought it was a joke, I thought it was like an old thing we heard, rumor, but I checked with 4 or 5 different people, they all related the same story, and they were present at that time. So they made Islam very complicated. They tried to organize an independent community, making people work for them without paying them, but they say we work together in farming and this kind of stuff, and we share the money we have. But actually the people coming from outside, some of them took advantage of that. And that led finally to the split of that first group to a lot of other Muslim denominations. Because one person who converted to Islam out there, he was a follower of that group, Morabitun. One day in the market he met a Muslim coming from the capital of the country, and he said, "Oh, I never know that there were other Muslims in the country." And that person said to him, "Well, what you do is strange. Islam is not like this. It's much more open." So this encounter between both triggered the first session. They said, the Morabbitun made Islam so difficult for us, so we will follow the true Islam. So-called Salafi. I said so-called Salafi here because it's not the main aspect, as these people don't really care about Salafism, whatever. They just wanted to observe their 5 daily prayers in their way, and they are not sectarian though. But they opened a new mosque, and there was a new split for other reasons out there, and finally there was a group getting some funding of the Ahmadi group, Ahmadi community. So now you have an Ahmadi mosque out there as well. And finally a sheikh came from Syria, linked to the Alawi movement, the Alawi Tariqa, and now you have 4 main mosques. But the problem, because of what happened in the history, making Islam very complicated for people, you have only about 200 people who have remained Muslims. So 600 people, they left Islam, and some of them are very upset with Muslims. Whereas before Islam presence out there, you don't find any animosity. It's a country, Mexico, even Colombia, you can go in the street, in the sidewalk, and you can pray, and nobody will tell you nothing. You can pray in the airport, of course, in the station, in wherever, and people are very friendly with Muslims. They don't really know what it is, but they respect. And when you find people having animosity against Islam, often it came from kind of mistake which has been done in the name of Dawah, unfortunately. Though I was there this year in Ramadan, I spent 10 days during Ramadan out there, and I found out that you can take iftar and pray Tarawih in 5 different locations. So on the one hand, it looks to be good, and the other hand, it's very divided community. Because between the 5 places you can take iftar or pray, you can just walk like 10 minutes from a mosque to another one. So they are located in the same area. But for these reasons, people are very divided, and there is kind of competition amongst these Muslim organizations, so they don't really like people coming, going to one place, and the next day they go to pray Tarawih somewhere else. So it's quite very interesting example, because 95-97% of the Muslim community out there are converts or sons of people converted to Islam, which is quite rare. But we see that they still try to find their way, because you have 5 different locations, which means 5 groups, because the 5th group is a Turkish movement called Süleymanci. But no, you still have all the 2 local groups which want to make their own space, because they feel somehow colonized by these groups from Turkey which want them to speak Turkish and so on. So it's very interesting situation. At the same time, it's very sad when we reflect on Dawah, because so many mistakes have been made, and now you find like just 20 people going to each mosque. When talking about common mistakes in Dawah projects, because I think we like to speak about good things, but in order to change what happened, it's interesting to also assess what's done wrong these last years. First of all, sometimes you find crazy things when you travel, even in West African countries. I found that, but no, the example is in Mexico. You find a big building, and you go inside, and it's supposed to be a madrasa. Maybe it costs $2 million, but it's totally empty, because they built it, they got some support from outside, zakat, sadaqah. They made a nice concept, but actually they built the building and nobody come, because they don't have the authorization to accommodate students. And then it's an important waste of money, which is directly connected to management problems. Another mistake or error you can find in what they call Dawah project, I think it's my own understanding on that. It's like in many cases, they may mix up social work and Dawah project. I saw that in Medellin, in Colombia, for instance, this year. What they do is that they cook food and they go to the streets, and when they do that, if you ask them why you do that, they will say, we do that only for Dawah. which is totally wrong in terms of Islamic theology, because you shouldn't do that just for dawah. You should do that for people's interest. But they do that as a tool to attract people. So they give coffee, they give food. At the same time, they have a booklet about Islam, so they give that at the same time to poor people and say them, you come, please come, let's talk about Islam. And the poor people out there, you know, they have, of course, their own sensitivity and their own smart way to think about that, so they feel it's not the church trying to evangelize them. That's how it's perceived. That looks very like evangelical groups out there doing that and offering money to people in order that they go to the church. So I think it's very bad for the credibility of such organizations because they totally mixed up projects. Whereas in the same country, in Cali, I saw a mosque doing the same work, homeless feeding and so on, but without any reference to Islam. When they go, you see they are Muslims, the way they dress. They give food to people. They say, we do that because we want to show rahmah to people. And also, when we do that, we feel Allah's favor on us because we are very lucky of our situation, but we forget. So the fact to help people has two interests. We respond to Allah's call, and also we feel our situation, alhamdulillah, what we have. And they don't speak about Islam. They seem not to make da'wah, but this is much more efficient way of doing da'wah because people observe. When they observe, they see that these people look sincere. They don't offer things in order to gain something back. They do by love they have for you. And people are very sensitive on that. Another problem I saw in Chiapas, Mexico, same place. People want to make da'wah without proper knowledge. So we were in a taxi and it's a very religious place with a lot of Christian groups, a lot of different denominations. And one Muslim brother, he tried to talk to the driver about Islam. But somehow he lost the debate. So the Christian pastor, you know, he gave him so many evidence about his faith and he didn't know what to say. So for me it was kind of an example. Sometimes people want to show Islam, to teach people about Islam, but they forgot to study it properly before talking too much because it can be counterproductive as well. Very important big problem for me, according to me, this is using da'wah or Islam in general for other purpose. So it's like I do some projects fi sabilillah, so-called fi sabilillah, but I do it for my own interest, for my money, for my work, for whatever. And I see that in other towns in Latin America, people giving, you know, there are two people going to the mosque for the first time. They say, we heard about Islam, we saw Arabic writing the wall, so we just come to ask questions. So they try to explain them what Islam is. They insist that they may recite Shahadatain and enter to Islam very quickly. Maybe that's a problem itself. But the main concern here, the main problem, at the same time they do that, before the guy is ready to say Shahada, he say, wait. Now we're going to dress with a nice dress, kufi, whatever, and we take a video, and we wear the mask because we have to show that we respect the COVID protocol, and now you can say Shahada. You know, it's total staging. It's like you pray, and subhanAllah is totally denying the new Muslim sensibility because they don't go there to make film or to make some marketing or advertisement about Islam. They come from themselves, and you make them playing some role. Do it again, recite Shahada again. Personally, it happened to me. 3 years after I was young when I became a Muslim. 3 years later, I was Muslim, but I needed the certificate to, if you want to get married, if you want to go to the Hajj, whatever. So I felt, okay, I need a paper which writes that I'm a Muslim. So I went to a mosque and I spoke to the imam. And people knew me there. They knew I was Muslim. They say, okay, you know what, we will do that paper, but we will make another Shahada in public after after Juma khutbah, you know. And at that time I was weak. I was young, so I didn't say nothing. I said, oh, okay. I felt it was stupid, but it was strange. So I came and they said there is new Muslim here, and Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Allahu Akbar, everybody is so happy. And I was Muslim 3 years, going to the mosque. But they wanted to make it showing after the khutbah. This was in France, a big mosque. Also staging, I think is very problematic. It appears funny for us, but it's very sad because it's not just one example. It's quite widespread now in the world. Another problem raised by our sister here is that there is no follow-up of people converted to Islam in many cases. So you can find people becoming Muslim, but even 6 months later they don't know to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, they don't know how to pray, and they ask people to help, but sometimes they don't find. Now, it's even worse part. Still, we continue with that common mistakes in Dawah projects. A lot of people make Islam very difficult, little accessible since the first day. They reverse priorities, they got some strict rules, they have some extremist interpretations too. If you want an extreme example, in the city of Mexico, 42 years old lady went to a mosque and she said, oh, I'm reading about Islam online. I've done that for a long time, so now I would like to convert, to become a Muslim. So she said the Shahada, Alhamdulillah, but then she was told that she couldn't go back there without the mahram, and that she has to wear the niqab, that it's better for her. And they said that to a woman who is single, she lives with her mother, she lives with a kid who is 6 in the city of Mexico, where Muslims are 0.1% or less than that. And then she said to me, she texted me online, because we had a contact before, talking about Islam. She said, I think Islam is not for me. I said to her, why? Oh, because you know, you have to go out with the mahram every time. I'm alone, I'm single. So. And they said I must dress with the niqab. And so Islam is not for me. So I explained to her, no, Islam is not like this. Take it easy. Take it easy step by step. Don't listen to what they say. I think it's a problem, very special case. This is quite an extreme case, but that shows kind of the approach we have to new Muslims somehow. Another problem, what I call sectarianism, it means that a lot of people, they say they want to call people to Islam, Dawah, but actually they call people to their own denomination. They want people to be Ahbash, to be Shi'i, to be Salafi, to be Naqshbandi, whatever it is. Some of them just put their own school of thought or their own denomination before Islam. And that makes also difficult for people, and they may not understand that. Another big problem in many countries, especially in Latin America, again, is the fact to culturalizing, I don't know how to pronounce that, culturalizing Islam, to make it very cultural, yeah? To make it like it's you have to eat curry, or you have to eat couscous, or you have... No, seriously, somehow you find this kind of changing the dress. But in every country you go is different according to the people you meet, or speaking their language. So now you have a lot of Turkish groups involved in Dawah. They ask Muslims to study Turkish and to use Turkish names to speak. So it's an example which also makes some confusion between universal faith, Islam is for anybody in the world, and specific cultures which are not wrong, but you cannot put that at the same level on Islam. We spoke about the confusion between principles, fundamentals, and details in Islam as well. But in some cases it's very dangerous, because some people, I got to know some people, woman wearing niqab, but she was asking if As-Salat al-Isha has 3 or 4 rakat, and they weren't sure about that. And it's like the knowledge they got about Islam was so weak, so few, but they speak about niqab, they speak about is it halal to cut this part and whatever details, but they neglect the fundamentals of Islam in terms of prayers, but also in terms of faith. Somehow it shows something very weird, where you can find people looking very religious, if I can say, but without any understanding. If you want another funny example, that is somebody I respect a lot. So I won't say, he's not well known, I won't say in which country it is. But he converted to Islam and he became an imam. Because in that local community there were like 10 Muslims only and nobody could be the imam. And he's the imam, so he welcomed me, he said, I'm doing my best, but I still have to learn, so please help me. Very humble person. But then he began to talk to me about his girlfriend. He said, my girlfriend, I live with her. And I say, how is your wife? I say, what do you mean? She's not my wife. And I said, but then you should get married. He say, you think so? I say, yes, my brother, in Islam you cannot live with your girlfriend. But he didn't hear of that. And he goes at the time at 4:30 in the morning, 4:30 a.m. he goes to the mosque to lead Salat Fajr. No, he's a serious person. But nobody told him that. Nobody told him that. It's a very crucial need. And when we think about these examples, it shows also our responsibility for dawah. Because some people in remote countries where Muslims are very few, they really look to someone to help them to learn. You know, any one of you will go to Colombia or I don't know where, Ecuador or Bolivia, just to travel. I'm sure you'll find people, they want you to stay there to teach or to lead Tarawih because they can't do that or whatever. It's very needed. That's the examples I said. The first example I said, the niqab. Also, yes, the problem of polygamy. It's very common practice in Latin America to make Muslim women believe that polygamy is almost fard. And I don't make that up. They make think, you know, Islam, I must have 4 wives and you have to accept, and people accept because they are told to. And some people take advantage of that somehow. And also it makes it difficult because then you have some sisters saying, Islam is very, very difficult for me. Say, why? Because if I get married, my husband has 4 wives and I'm jealous and I don't think I can be Muslim. So this is just counter examples of a proper da'wah, making Islam difficult for people. Also in the way they teach, I went to a big mosque, a sheikh from Egypt. It was a course for new Muslims. So basically they ignore everything of Islam, even the basics, but they took like 10 minutes to talk about if Azrael was the real name of the angel of death. And he said, no, we cannot really say that, but maybe, you know, but 10 minutes for that. And this kind of teaching, which is totally show what I'm trying to express. We have fundamentals, we have some principles, and people take some very detailed questions to make it great. We don't even know why sometimes. Yeah, also hijab, that's a very contextual problem in some countries. Hijab is difficult to wear, and if you don't get that, you cannot go to a class. Even for new Muslims, I think it's problematic too. Problem with halal meat as well. If they say that the first day of someone wanted to be Muslim, I think is not the proper way to teach Islam. Because you make everything in one block. So finally, this thing is counterproductive. People think that Islam is not for them, and they can even feel some hatred, animosity against Islam after having lived those experiences. Before they lived that, they loved Islam, and after they meet such people, they may have some problem, which is very sad. Now to respond quickly to the question of our brother here. He said to me to say how I converted to Islam. And that's something I would like to speak about, not for me, because I don't think my personal history is interesting, but in general. But I think it will teach a few things really in line with these counter examples. So I try to make it quick and brief, which is not easy because it's a 4 or 5 years process. So basically, I was raised as a Catholic, but I didn't believe in the Catholic dogma when I was a kid. So I still believed in God, and I still believed as Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, as a prophet. For me, it means he is a perfect guide, but he's a human. He's someone you have to follow. It's like your master. But for me, it was clear that God and Jesus were nothing to do. So when they said Mary, Mother of God in the Catholic Church, I couldn't pray like that even when I was a kid. So I reject basically the Catholic teachings at that age. I didn't really like that. I went to the church and I didn't find any interest, but because of my family tradition, I was raised somehow in a very light way though, because they did not really care of religious practice, but you still have the minimum teachings. And so I said, okay, I believe in God, but I don't have any religion, basically. And when I was 15, I was listening French rap music, and I heard a song of someone who was well known in the rap before, and he was involved in crime, whatever. And then he changed. When he converted to Islam, he stopped singing, and 2 years later, he wrote a 10-minute song about his journey. So the song had 3 parts. He said how he grew up, the problems he had, then he said how he became like kind of a gangster, and the 3rd part, how he knew Islam and what Islam did in his life. I was 15 when I heard that. I never heard about Islam before. Never. I mean, you know, maybe at the same time, 2001, there is the 9/11. But for me, I never saw that as a Muslim thing. I was watching TV, I was just 15. I said, whatever, it's like war problems, right? You know, crime. I did not relate to Islam for me. But the song, when I listened to the song, I felt, oh, that's a very nice picture of Islam. And Islam is a very good religion. But I still didn't want to enter. I wasn't interested in changing that. At the same time, I began to read about theology in very, very light way. Buddhism, Taoism, because I asked questions. I thought we had a soul. There is death after there is life after death. I want to know, to understand things, you know. I was just looking at Islam, and when I read about Islam, I felt I already believe in that. I already believe in Allah, because I believe in God. It's exactly the way. I say, okay, Islam is very good for me, but I didn't want to join. I didn't want to change religion. I said I'm a free thinker. And years passed, I was 16, 17, 18. And at that time I got involved in a lot of social problems, family problems. So I was very depressed, drank a lot of alcohol, spending time in the street, you know, very difficult life at that time for me. And I hated that. I didn't like. I say, what's the purpose of life? I can't stay like this. I believe in God. I want to know what's after the death. And I felt I believe in God, but I don't feel any kind of link, any kind of relation to God. It's just an abstract idea. It was just an abstract idea in my mind. So I didn't feel nothing as faith. I felt like an ideology, an idea. God exists, but how to get connected. So when I read more about Islam, I found it's interesting for me because it says you have to pray 5 times a day. So I think it's a good method. That's how I thought. Alcohol is prohibited, so it's wise. I don't understand why Catholic, they let people drinking so much. That's the ideas I got at that time. Finally, I got to a mosque just to talk to the Imam, and he made me recite Shahada. He said, you believe in that, you should tell it. So I said it, and then he said, you are Muslim? I said, I don't want to be Muslim. He said, yes, but anyway, you are Muslim. Take it step by step. I was just 17 and I went out and I continued drinking, I continued whatever. I didn't have any Islamic practice. 2 years like that. You know, it stayed in my mind, it's something good I like, but tomorrow, whatever. One day I went to Morocco 2 years later just for a personal trip to see how it is. First trip outside. And out there I see, you hear Adhan, and I lived in a very poor neighborhood in Morocco with people. They didn't speak French, I didn't speak Arabic, but somehow we communicated and they hosted me. And they said they spoke to Islam with me, but I didn't understand. And one of them from outside came and he speak French and he says, Islam, Islam, Islam. And I was trying to listen to him. So I said to him, yeah, I'm Muslim. I said, oh, you're a Muslim? He said, yes. I said, but why you don't pray? And then I said, I don't know how to pray. I don't know how to make the ablution. And that's how I got to practice that. Against my will. Not against my will, but without wanting that. It was out of me. Like, okay, why not? Let's do that ablution. Then, we go to pray, come with us. I never tried to pray. Okay, we go. Then I prayed, I began to feel something and to be interested in that. So they said to me, you have to pick up a Muslim name and so on. I say, my name is Jibril Ali, because I liked how it sounds. So they pushed me for that. So it was like kind of cultural initiation. And I got back to Switzerland. I didn't practice yet, but then I moved to France, Paris, housing projects. At that time, I lived in a very tough area, and I got quite a lot of friends out there, all Muslims. All people were Muslims out there, but a lot didn't practice, a lot were involved in crime and so on. But I got to know, I got to feel here you have two ways. One way to live is the gangster life, and the other way is to be Muslim. And I don't like bad things, and I was still, already believing. I said, let's try to get involved with Muslims. I began to go to the mosque, but I didn't know why. It's like you go to have discipline, like a sport. And after Ramadan, first Ramadan, I didn't understand how it works. So they said to me, fast, and I was outside till the night, and late at night, I haven't, eaten yet. It was, for instance, Salat al-Maghrib was 7 p.m., or at the time it was Asr. But till 8, 9, I didn't eat. Because I didn't know how it works, Ramadan. And then they said to me, there is food at the mosque, so you should go take iftar there. That's how I got initiated to Islam. But then, because of that, I began to practice. I began to pray in the mosque, but then I began to pray home and to force myself to pray 5 times a day. And because of that, I totally changed. Within 4 or 5 months or less, I got very convinced about Islam. And I got the intention to stop everything what's considered haram and to start to follow what we are supposed to do. Why I say that is just a quick story. We can't speak a long time about that because it's summarized. But I say that because that's my own journey to Islam. It was totally step by step. And it's a very long-term process against me. Against me, it means out of my will. It wasn't planned to be Muslim and to learn or whatever. So, I think based on that, for me now, if I see someone wanting to be Muslim or even no, but it's just interesting, I make it very easy for him, just based on my experience. I don't push. I try to accompany, to make it step by step, to make him understand why and how we can deal with that. Very easy going. Because at that time I didn't say, but people trying to push me also. And it made the other effect. If you go to the mosque, people push you, a lot of rules, a lot of pressure, then you go back home, you think, maybe I don't want to go back there. And no, alhamdulillah, as a Muslim, I don't have any issue with people, whatever they do to me. Muslims, Islam, I believe in Islam, so I'm not affected by that anymore, alhamdulillah. But in the first month, the first years, very sensitive on how people treat you. And I think that it's very important to make it easy for people to open the door, and then they have their own process. It takes time. But it's logic, because even for non-Muslims, even for Muslims, we have the same thing. A lot of Muslims don't practice, take it step by step with them. So now we have this question of taking a Muslim name. And frankly, later I didn't tell that, Later in the mosque, they say, what's my name? I said, Jibril Ali, and they say, what's your first name? I said, Baptiste. One other brother, he said to me, Baptiste is the prophet, John the Baptist, so it's Yahya. So now we call you Yahya here. And then everybody called me Yahya, and that's how it became my real name, because I was 19. And for me, it's a very bad reason, but I tell the truth. In the area where I lived, it was very tough, and there is ethnic tensions. And if you're white, people don't like white people out there somehow, because it's a very segregated country. So you're on the other side of where it's supposed to be. So yes, people say, you're Yahya. Yahya, his name is Yahya. Okay, he's one of us. But if you say, my name is Baptiste, it's okay, white guy. It's kind of... So for me, I found my interest in that. And after years, people always call me Yahya, Yahya. So it became part of my name, part of my identity. And people came in the housing project I lived and say, where's Baptiste? One guy came and, nobody, there's no Baptiste here. Then I went out at the same time and said, he's here, Baptiste. The guy was looking at me, well, Yahya. Then, they never heard about that. So it's a funny story about my name. But no, I keep my name Yahya because it's part of my own history. But for me, it's not Islamic thing. I can say my name is Baptiste, I'm fine with that. But because of my journey, I keep both names. But when someone say I have to change my name, I say, if you want, why not, But you shouldn't. It's not an Islamic thing. What's an Islamic name? You have woman converted to Islam. Her name is Natalia. Then she say, my Muslim name is Ahlam. Ahlam means dreams. You say, what's that? Muslim name? Or Kamila? Or whatever sound from another country. It's weird. What's Muslim in that name? It's totally cultural somehow. No, I'm late, so I try to make it fast to finish that. Now I have kind of epistemological reflection. How can we know what we believe? Because a lot of people will challenge your faith. They say, how come you can justify, you believe in something that doesn't exist. They will tell you that. Then you want to discuss with them. Even for Dawah, it's important because now we are in an area of rationality. Everyone wants to explain. Yeah, you just imagine things, how you can believe in a religion. And I think that's the faith. The root of the faith is a balance, according to my understanding or experience, between three pillars. And we have to connect all three pillars to be strong in our faith. The first pillar, what we can call bayan in Arabic, it suggests that we are Muslims, we believe in a way because we trust the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we trust his Amin, is someone who speaks the truth, and after him there was a transmission of pious people, sincere people till today. So I'm Muslim because I trust him, I trust the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I trust the people who came after him till today. That's traditional part. That's why I trust that. And that's very strong. That's what we learn, basically. The other pillar, Burhan's side, is rational reasoning. In that approach, I would say, I'm a believer because I think everything is created, so there is a creator. So God, there must be a God. There must be initial power which started the world, and so on, and so on, and so on. You have this tradition here also to justify your faith. But only with Burhan, only with the rational reasoning, you cannot reach the certainty, because there was always some limits. You cannot explain everything. As we said the other day, you can't explain why we pray Salat al-Maghrib, we pray 3 rakats. You don't know why, but you have to accept that. It's the transmissional part. Last part, the third approach of faith is through what we can call Irfan or Dawq. The history of the Sheikh Abu Hamid al-Ghazali is very important here, because he got a crisis in his life. He got a crisis, but he was a scholar of an enormous knowledge. But for the first 2 points, Bayan Burhan, he was a scholar with his knowledge, with the transmission he got, and with the rational reasoning. But he didn't get deep into the Irfan experience. So he went out in retreat for years. He got the yaqeen, can say. What he say, the doubt. And with that, he was sure about his faith. Now, if people ask me what I believe, I try to explain that the faith comes from the 3 pillars at the same time. You cannot get one without the other one. Irfan, for me, I take it in a broader way even, broader meaning. That's why I think Irfan is not just the kashf you have, the fact you see some visions, some dreams that give you faith. That's even the experience. In my journey, it was very important that the fact I began to pray as people told me to pray. So I began to pray 5 times a day and nothing else. And I saw how much my life changed. And then because of that, I trust. You understand my point? Because of the experience I made, which worked in my life, I say, okay, this method, if I can say, is the right method because it takes you from here to there. And the practice work. Years later, maybe the practice doesn't work for me. Why? Because I don't implement where I'm supposed to be. That's it. But I'm sure if you were doing what we are supposed to be, you feel your life is getting higher, your faith is getting higher, and for me it's part of experience which goes far away the rational reasoning here. So even for Dawah, with people wanting to get some evidence in terms of thinking, I like to expose these 3 pillars at the same time because I think when we have that all together, it's a very strong foundation. Last point, finish. Good practice, good examples of Dawah. To conclude, I think that through Islam, over the last years, over the last decades, we can witness so many people having become Muslims, or people having begun to practice Islam, totally changed their life for good. They were very lost, very depressed, very angry, involved in crime, hatred, and with Islam they became the opposite. And we have so many testimonies like that. Can witness in USA, for instance, conversions in prison of massive number of Muslims. They totally change. And I think that for Dawah also, these people are very efficient because they can talk about their life and see concretely what Islam gave them. The problem here is sometimes people, I got that in Colombia, there were Muslims, Colombians, they went to the US, illegal migrants, and they were involved in crime and they got like 20, 30 year sentence in prison in the USA. So in the prison they knew Islam and they got to memorize Quran and to practice. Then they brought it back to Colombia after the prison time. So they are still Muslim, alhamdulillah. But somehow it's so difficult for them to go back to their country alone, without money, without means, without also ummah, without a group around them. So that's why charity project is also a part to sustain and to support Dawah, because as we say, kufr, in our tradition, kufr, the poverty can lead to kufr. Because sometimes you can be in such difficult situation that talks, Dawah, you cannot get it because you need to eat, you need to have the minimum to be okay with your life. So I think that we cannot dissociate the humanitarian aid projects and the Dawah. Also there is a big intellectual effort, especially at that day, which is needed to tackle that Dawah work. Finally, last word, would say just 3 things. That first of all, Islam has to be lived, practiced, before to be advertised. Before talking about Islam to others, I should try to implement it in my life. For that, sincerity is very important and concrete efforts to live Islam as Muslims should do. Then we live in a crucial time, crisis time, age of a lot of problems. We have these new epistemologies, what we call progressivism. We can talk about that in the questions if you mind. If not, we don't have time. There is some new intellectual ideological agenda challenging the very essence of Islamic belief, and this may confuse a lot of people, Muslims, especially among the youth. It has to be addressed as well. And again, da'wah has to be done by example. A brother, a sheikh who is here now today, he talks about one of the Habib Omar's story in Yemen, how a guy who kind of got animosity against Islam in his past, but when he met the sheikh, Habib Omar, because of the akhlaq, finally became Muslim. And you have so many stories like that, with pious people, with salihin. You have also a very interesting story in Guantanamo. There was a Mauritanian inmate, a Muslim from Mauritania, was deported to Guantanamo for absolutely nothing. Nothing to do with extremism, just a mistake. But the warden converted to Islam because of him, subhanAllah. Later, the guy was liberated, went back to Mauritania, and the warden from the USA, he traveled to Mauritania to visit him, and they kept very good contact. The akhlaq is very powerful. So that's my advice for myself, to try to practice Islam, live Islam, inshallah, in a better way before talking, but also when people ask questions, it's our duty to respond and to try to deliver the messages in the correct way. Barakallahu fikum, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah for the questions.
Shukran, merci beaucoup. I have to thank him in his language as well, and that's part of da'wah. You need to speak to people in their language, and that's something we don't do in South Africa. So, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Shukran for that. We did start a little bit late, so we are running a little bit late, but we promised you a question and answer session. So we're going to have about 15 minutes of that, inshallah. We want you to ask specific questions, not give speeches. Ask the question, and inshallah he can answer. And then the lunch is already ready, so we don't want to delay it as well. We want to serve you a hot lunch, so we don't want it to get cold. So inshallah, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to you guys for your questions, inshallah. So as I said, short and sweet, straight to the point, and that's it. Aisha, and then Yunus, Uncle Yunus. Aisha, and after that Yasmin. Yes, Aisha, you have 30 seconds for your question. Aisha is my student, so I can say that. Yes.
I wanted to ask, what advice... Assalamu alaikum again. What advice can you give to others who have recently converted to Islam?
Okay. You have 1 minute to answer that.
Well, very difficult to answer quick, but I think the first, I tried to do that to give some solutions. Solution is not clear, of course, but the advice, it would be to try to go along with a lot of different Muslims, not just one, to keep open mind and to take it step by step by trying to identify the most important point and to be patient. I would tell them it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Islam is for your life, it's not for 3 months, so take it easy. It's a long-term progress. That's my first thing I have in mind. Shukran.
I just have one question again. I just wanted to know about the deconstruction of, for example, Dawah. I mean, I know that you indicated there is dangers in terms of the postmodernist type of deconstruction. But isn't deconstruction also necessary because of the exclusions, for example, in the implementation of Dawah or the implementation of a range of activities, whether or not it's charity, to the extent of women or those that are determined as other. So isn't this construction necessary for us to be able to get to the objectives of Islam, or what it's necessary for? And so deconstruction must happen.
Shukran. Actually, it depends what we want to deconstruct, because if we want to speak about concrete applications of Islam today, of course it should be challenged, it should be deconstruct and question if it's in line with the essence of Islam. But some of the agenda under the name of postmodernism, they want to deconstruct everything. If we go in that level, we go to atheism, and people can't believe what they want. That's not the point. But as believers, we have also to be aware of this danger. Just the issue of postmodernism, of progressivism. For instance, it looks good. It looks like the society is getting better, and a lot of people know that. That's a major epistemological reference we have now in a lot of countries from the West. But what it means, then people say, why we need the Quran for? Because if we are better than before, the Sahaba were just backward people. That's how they think. Or they say the prophets came for their time, but now we live in a better time. And myself, in my belief, I don't think we are better than the people of before. I think we have the same issues in terms of ethics and morality. And for this reason, the Quran is a message that is very valid for our time until the end of the time. That's my belief, but somehow it goes in contradiction with some epistemological assumptions and deconstruction. So it depends when we want to deconstruct.
Yunus, speakers.
Jazakumullah khair, Ustaz. Question of Dr. Yahya. A little bit earlier in your presentation, you also mentioned intellectual jihad, for example. What I'd like to understand is the split between da'wah and jihad, for example. How can one turn this into a methodology? For example, at what point, I hear my Sheikh Farid this morning and also my sister mentioning the new legislation coming in, and I do recognize there's a whole lot of internal jihad among Muslims that has to happen before we can even discuss this bill, for example. So maybe just as a methodology, how can one, at what point does one do da'wah, and at what point does jihad come in there?
It's also a very broad question, very easy to respond in 1 minute, but jihad is the struggle, jihad is the effort, so it's a word we use for anything we want to do in the way of Allah, fisabilillah. It involves everything we do. So that's why I talk about intellectual jihad, because at that time it's more an intellectual jihad than everything else in many contexts. But the methodology, I would say very few points, because I can't respond to that now, no time. First point is to understand people's context. So I always say the same story that I will repeat. There is one imam came to France from abroad, and his well-known sheikh, he was said, you should lead the khutbah. He refused. He said, no, I don't want to do that. I will take time to understand society before talking. Because you cannot teach people about Islam, about concrete things, unless you know their reality, you know their problems, you know their issues. That's the first point. The second point, again, for me, it would be to practice. The best da'wah, again, is practice. You go somewhere with a community, you practice. I think the best example is what happened in Indonesia with people coming from Yemen, first Muslims. They didn't go just to speak, but the way they live, people are attracted, because at that age, most people on earth, they're looking for ways to live better. They are suffering from various afflictions, so they are very open to find a way. But we are at the stage where so many people speak, too many discourses, so they don't feel touched by whatever you can say, but they feel very touched by one's behavior. I think that's the key for da'wah, and then we can organize some space to deliver a message, but at a later stage.
In the back, and then the back to the front.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'd like to firstly say that I'm very concerned with the efforts of Dawah in the African communities, considering the fact that Islam has been in South Africa for so long, but there's still a very, like a minority of people getting into the fold of Islam. And you did mention in your talk about people enforcing their culture in African people. That is the main problem in South Africa, is that people in Guguletu do not want to be Indians. People in Khayelitsha do not want to be Pakistani. They want to continue being Africans, but still be part of Islam. So my question is, how do we propagate Islam in South Africa, especially in the rural areas, in a way that is relatable to the way of life of African people?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran for a very good question, very good point. You asked a question, you made a point actually. So you expressed the solution by itself. I would just say that there was here 2-3 years ago I came, there was kind of a convention, and a brother came from Soweto, so he's from here, and he tried to show that the way the Zulu nation used to greet each other is totally in line with Islamic teachings. And I think it's a very wise way to speak, to try, when you speak to someone's culture, you try to show Islam is universal, it's not against you, it's for everybody. And you will find that even if you in your own tradition, you have so much treasures which is totally in line with Islamic teachings. And I think the fact to emphasize on this, to focus on that, it helps people to feel they have value, that the history is nothing wrong. Islam somehow is just correct some people's problem, even cultural problems, but it corrects all cultures, not only one. But having said that, within the culture of people, you have so much deepness, you have so much interest that it should be kept well and show that it's part of Islam in itself, because it's in line with Islamic teachings. I would say this.
Dr. Brodard, I would like to get your view. I'd like to get your view on what is typically known as charismatic preaching, and I'm talking here about the more popular voices of Dawah in the Muslim world. We know of them in the Christian world, where they attract large crowds. They have great rhetoric on stage. They have great stage personality. They become very popular, and unfortunately, they also fall victim to sin. They either are misled or they do mislead. Now, I'd like to ask you to speak around the ethics of charismatic preaching, particularly for Muslim da'is.
Thank you for the question, Shukran. I think here again, when we got some examples before of that kind of charismatic preaching, which is very widespread, I'm not confident and I don't really trust that way of doing. However, it may help people to understand Islam, but I think some guidelines would be to respect others' sensibility, which often is not done, because people trying to tackle some Christians' arguments, they show, look, you have so many mistakes in your book, in your tradition, whatever. And I think it's against the Islamic teachings, because the first Muslims were exposed to Christians. I never read they told such a bad way to them, and they respect them, and they propose what they have to propose. They propose them Islam, but they are free to accept or not. And we see that in Quds, for instance, in the heart of the Muslim world, for 14 centuries, people kept their Christian faith, because some people they didn't want to change, and they were still respected. So in those charismatic talks, I think a main problem is the respect and the way people treat each other, and that's very counterproductive effect. So I think that it's important to take into consideration the sensibility of others' belief. Even of course, we don't share the same value for some points. Also, a good way can be to emphasize on common points. Because I always say that in Europe, I say that the problem is not Christianity. Christianity is very good for Muslims in Europe. It's very good for Muslims. The problem is some kind, not all, kind of atheist ideologies, atheist movements, who are very much challenging Islam, not only Islam, but the common interest of humans. And you will see that Christians and Muslims, according to the difference in terms of dogma, sometimes they can work together in terms of humanitarian aid, in terms of trying to foster human dignity, and I think it has to be addressed more. Again, it involves acting before talking, because the charismatic talk, the idea is to win the debate and to make people convert to Islam, and then nothing happened. There is a question of Sheikh Riyadh online, but I'm not sure how to give him the possibility to talk. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Barakallahu Fik, Shukran Sheikh. Barakallahu Fik for the ideal proposition. Of course, I would be happy to do that. I need help of you, Sheikh, and help of many people around here who are presenting today's talk. It's a very good point, mashallah, because as we said in the introduction, the idea is not to talk about that. The idea is to react to problems we have and to do some steps in a very concrete way, inshallah, to improve what happened. That's the problem when I told about the issues we have in terms of dawah. I think it's important to talk about the problems, but it's not enough, because if we just talk about that, nothing changes. And people are upset because we criticize what they do somehow. So it's very needed to propose new ways of doing that. So inshallah, I hope that we do that all together.
Final question, please. Final question.
Thank you very much for your very open discourse that you have here. My question to you is, I would assume that the majority of people in here are Muslim. And what we need probably at this point in time is da'wah amongst the Muslims. I.e., should we, the focal point of the Muslim ummah is the masjid. Why don't we have these discussions more often within the masjid? Number one. Number two, how do we raise the level of understanding of the Muslims from the essentials of Islam or the basics of Islam to the higher levels of Islam? That discourse is almost missing. Then thirdly, you subject yourself to questioning. Every week we go to a khutbah, a guy stands there, delivers a sermon, preaches, but no feedback, no interaction from the community, no asking, did you understand me? If you're a good teacher, the first thing that you wish to ascertain is, did your people understand you? The guy delivers a lecture, he packs up, he goes. 1,000 people, 5,000 people, they leave. 5,000 different views on what was said and what was intended to be said. So how do we bridge these gaps? I.e., the proper utilization of the masjid, open discussion and feedback, community interaction with the speaker standing in front as you're doing now, answering questions. Shukran jazeelan.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran jazeelan. You raised again an important question and you bring solutions somehow. I have to say that it's my main concern for a long time, not in the field of dawah, but it was my concern in the field of a lot of Islamic practice, namely humanitarian aid, social work, because at that time, 15 years ago, I went to a lot of conferences, talks in the mosque, very good talk, intellectual things. Then, in the field, nothing happened. Later, things happened to, we got new projects in the field, so finally people began to organize. But still, there were a gap between so-called discursive way, the discursive area where people deliver talks on the basis of reflection and the concrete work, concrete action. And both fields we don't communicate, both areas don't talk to each other, which lead to the situation of today. So it's a very current question. I don't have the reply, but I think you mentioned already a few points, and it will be needed to organize kind of workshop to make both speaking together. When I mean both, it's one side so-called speakers, intellectual, whatever we call, and the other side the activists and the people doing field work. They have to communicate. It's very crucial, very needed. Shukran for the question.
Shukran to Dr. Yahya and all the those who are present here for the interesting question and answer session. Due to time constraints, we apologize for not being able to take any more questions, but we are going to socialize with him right now, inshallah, in the lunch as well. He is around in Cape Town for the next few weeks, so you are most welcome to meet him and talk to him, inshallah. Without any further ado, we're going to go straight into the word of thanks, which will be delivered by Muallima Masnoona Kamali from IPSA. So I hand over to Muallima Masnoona, who is also the manager of our postgrad program here at IPSA. Shukran.
First of all, we say Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, all praise and thanks is for Allah. Shukr to Allah for affording us the opportunity to rise this morning with our health and our strength intact, Alhamdulillah, and affording us the opportunity to be present here today to attend this wonderful seminar that was presented by Dr. Yahya Baptiste Brodard and hosted by IPSA. The content of the seminar was really eye-opening and inspiring as well. I hope all of you felt the same way as I did. And with that, we thank Dr. Brodard for gracing us with his presence and sharing with us his knowledge and experience that he's gathered over the many years on this very important topic of Dawah and other aspects relating to it. And thank you to the IPSA team, who was very well led by our Ustad Sheikh Fakhruddin Owaisi, for putting together this event. Shukran to Yusuf Hester and Sheikh Imran Ahmed for their technical and logistical support. Shukran to Mu'allima Aisha Ajit for her on-site support. Shukran to Taj Africa for taking care of our stomachs. He's sorted out our refreshments for breakfast, tea and lunch. Alhamdulillah. And last but not least, we make shukr to all of you who took the time out of your day to be present here with us, to come and sit in this seminar, and also to those who joined us online on Zoom, who we apologize for the technical issues that we had, and also those who joined us on our Facebook live stream. Shukran everybody. I hope that you all benefited. Alhamdulillah.
Shukran to Muallima Masnoona also for all the efforts she put in as the co-coordinator of this event. We'll conclude, inshallah, with the final dua. And I just want to mention the book, the story that Professor Yahya mentioned of the Mauritanian who was in Guantanamo Bay. He wrote a book on that. It's called The Mauritanian. And recently a movie was also made about it, in Hollywood actually, also called The Mauritanian. So it's a book worth reading and a movie worth watching. The story of the Mauritanian, who was an innocent inmate at Guantanamo, and his akhlaq at Guantanamo made some of those imprisoning him convert to Islam. So that's something we can also look forward to. Wal-Fatiha. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. اللهم افتح لنا بالخير وأختم لنا بالخير واجعل عواقب أمورنا بالخير بيدك الخير كله والعافية والصحة والبركة والقبول إنك على كل شيء قدير. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. شكرا. Thank you and Ramakasi. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Please proceed to the cafeteria for the lunch.
That's very important, no? Shukran for the questions. Let's smile. No.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. كيف حالك؟
It's a no, it's a